Good. So today we have with us the guy who started ENS, an overnight success which needed 5 years of really hard work. My guest and his team of 8 people and a few contributors bootstrapped a multi-billion-dollar DAO without any private investors. He goes way back to the early Ethereum Foundation times, and before that, he worked for Google as a software engineer. I'm sure there isn't any other guy who received more thank yous in the last 2 weeks, and because of that and many other reasons, I'm really pumped to have him as a guest at the Stakeborg DAO Talks. Nick Johnson. Nick, welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So, before anything else, I'm curious to know from all the ideas that you guys discussed at the Ethereum Foundation, how come you picked ENS?
So when I joined the Ethereum Foundation, my first job was on the Swarm team, which is a distributed content store. And they, for obvious reasons, had an issue where they needed human readable names for Swarm content. And so they wanted some form of name registry. And I, in the past, had been very interested in that sort of thing. I'd played around with DNS a lot and knew a fair bit about it. And I'd seen some of the other attempts at naming things on chain. And noticed how bad the crypto user experience was without human readable names, and found the existing solutions were all very basic and not very extensible or useful. So that sort of led me to starting to build ENS as sort of a side project initially, and it sort of rapidly escalated from there.
So, have you, from the beginning, have you felt that it will be something important with for the industry, or it was more like a moonshot?
It was. I thought that, initially, our goals were fairly modest in terms of addressing Ethereum addresses and Swarm and IPFS content, and that was basically it. And I thought that if we did well, we could be more or less ubiquitous for Ethereum. I thought, the Ethereum UX should be just names. And in some ways, we still haven't achieved that. Like ENS is very widespread, and people, recognize them instantly now. But you still see addresses all over the place, which is a bit of a shame. But on the other hand, we've far exceeded that because we now support multiple chains. We're used extensively for that. We support a bunch of other stuff, including more content networks, avatar information, reverse resolution, all that sort of stuff. So it's been sort of wildly more successful than expected in that regard.
Well, that's a good problem to have.
It is.
I was wondering, speaking about the recent airdrop, was that the airdrop was something that you guys planned? Was that something, as in planned from the beginning? Was that something that you guys realized at a certain point in time that it could be a good idea, so you started to play with the numbers and everything, or it was like a last minute thing, like what if we do this?
Mhm. So we always intended to decentralize governance of the ENS route. That was in the roadmap from day one, and it was something we're very public about. And we started with a multi-sig, and the multi-sig is not of people at ENS, but of people from the community, respected people in the Ethereum community. And it was always intended to be meaningful oversight rather than just rubber stamp. But we knew that we had to decentralize more than that. And the issue initially was uh, DAOs were very new. They were very untested. There were a lot of issues around like tooling and UX, and also just around the risks to them, both from code point of view and from things like takeover and so forth.
Yeah.
And a number of things changed between when we launched and now. One is that ENS's core code is stable enough that we felt confident basically locking it in. And so we set things up so that it's no longer possible for anyone, including the root multisig, to change the .eth registrar, which means that when you've registered a name, it's yours for as long as you've registered it, and nothing can take that away. And the second thing that's changed is DAOs and their tooling and so on have matured a lot. And so seeing the rise and success of things like compound-based DAOs, which use on-chain voting and so on, and the improved tooling with things like Tally and Sybil and Boardroom, and off-chain voting with Snapshot, and just seeing the actual practical success of some of these DAOs at operating protocols. And then in particular, the launch of Gitcoin, a public goods coalition that is very closely aligned in goals with ENS. All of those things contributed to deciding that now was the time. And so we started planning this probably a little bit over 3 months ago.
Gotcha. So I've seen a tweet from Brantley, and I know I should ask him, but since you are here with me, I will ask your 2 cents about it. He said, and I think it will remain like a very important phrase in the history of ENS. He said, "You are not airdropped free money; you were airdropped responsibility."
I love that so much. I liked it when it came out, but I like it even more now because it's turned into such a meme. And
Yep.
I was saying in our private chat yesterday that I think with that one tweet, Brantley has done more for educating people and making them think about the meaning of governance tokens than like everything else we've done put together.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Even us internally, we started to discuss about that because more than anything, it's a statement. It's something that this is how we think about it, and this is how you should think about it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it was not something you guys discussed. It was just the guy thinking about it and just tweeted it out.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It was just something that occurred to him, and it turned out to be to really resonate.
So I've seen another tweet from JMJ from Chapter 1 announcing a $10 million fund to support compelling ENS projects. Can you share more details about that? What does it mean in the context of the ENS business? What does it mean compelling projects?
Yeah, I know pretty much as you do. We were in a clubhouse yesterday, and he was there too, and he just announced it, and it was complete news to us as well. All I know is what you see in the tweet and what you might have heard in the clubhouse if you listened to it.
Okay, but what do you think? Probably the answer is I don't know. But what should mean compelling businesses in the
I
context
guess
of the
like
ENS business?
yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately he is looking for things that are going to make him a return, presumably,
Sure.
and so compelling in some sense will be a compelling business model, and and presumably interesting as well. Immediately, the thing that comes to mind for ENS is that there's a lot of room for sort of centralized convenience services on top of a decentralized platform. So, if you compare it to traditional domain names, we're the ICANN of ENS, and the registry of rather would be a better comparison. And we need people to be the registrars who can make it easy for somebody to buy an ENS name with a credit card or something like that. Or just to offer more facilities for doing things that are easier to onboard people with, so we can onboard a lot more people who are new to crypto without quite such a steep learning curve.
Yeah, yeah. It was. I mean, it's interesting how this industry works, isn't it? Like someone announces a fund for like your ecosystem, and you even don't know about it. It's like I think you can find that only in crypto.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it happens with projects all the time too. Somebody will announce, "Oh, we're building a new front end for ENS, or we're building like this secondary marketplace, or whatever." And it's like first thing we hear about it some of the time, and it's just this permissionless innovation, which is what the web was supposed to be about, before it became run by just like 4 large companies.
Yeah, I find it fascinating as well. Going to a hot topic, which is like it's hot no matter the season, the token. Can you please explain a little bit the logic behind the airdrop algorithm? I know that many people are aware about it, but I think you've seen people that were complaining like, look, we have 100 domain names and we receive the same amount of tokens and so on and so forth.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I'll be a little bit brutal and say, like, the people who have been complaining are exactly the people we wanted to be complaining about it. Um, the we've been quite vocal right from the beginning that we're trying to build a system that prioritizes use over speculation, and that we've seen other systems like Namecoin be basically strangled by speculation as a first use case. because it makes the market very illiquid. It makes it very difficult to find a name that is useful to you, and all of them are only available, for resale at inflated prices. And often, it could even be difficult to find, who owns the name or where they're selling it, if anywhere.
Yep.
It's a much better experience when you can just register a name at a fixed price from a registrar, like you typically do for most domains on DNS. And so we've always optimized the system for that and tried to build it in a way that firstly prioritizes real users. And I know people will get angry again at me using the word real users, but what I mean is people who are using the system for the reason it was built for.
Yep.
And so we've already sort of optimized for that. We have no intention of discriminating against people. We're just building a system where the incentives are set up to make it easier to use if you're doing the things that we think this system is good at. And so we took basically the same approach for the airdrop. We don't believe that the loudness of your voice in governance should be proportional to the number of domains you've registered. And there's no perfect mapping, but we thought a pretty good approximation was a combination of a few factors. And so what we used is we divided the airdrop in half. Half of it went to accounts based on how long they had owned at least one name for. So basically, every day that you owned at least one name in that account, it didn't matter whether it's 1 or 100, you got 0.22 tokens or thereabouts. The other half of the airdrop went to for how long into the future you've renewed a name for. And the intuition there is that if you've renewed your name for 10 years, that means you probably think ENS is going to stick around at least 10 years. It shows some faith in our longevity. And so you got 0.062 tokens per day you've renewed into the future. And then the final factor is whether you set up a primary ENS name, which is how your ENS name shows up in apps when you log into it and when you vote and things like that. And so if you had, then we doubled the total each person got for the airdrop.
Why was that so important for you guys that you double the rewards for that pairing between the address and the name?
I mean, primarily we were looking for strong signals that a person was using ENS as a useful platform. And that's quite a strong signal, because if you're registering names to speculate and not to actually use, then you're not going to waste the gas to set it. And, like all of these measures, it only works if people aren't expecting it. So, it only really works because we expected that most people setting this were doing it because it was useful to them. But it also is, just independent of that, it is actually a strong indication they really are using it in actual apps, because it gives you useful feedback. It means that if you set your ENS name and then you vote in Snapshot, for instance, your name comes up alongside your signature so that people can actually see you voted rather than in a difficult to read address.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And to be honest, I was pretty happy about that decision. So I know that you've discussed this with the guys from Bankless as well, but I'm curious to know an up-to-date. I know I can find it in Dune Analytics, but I'm curious to know what percentage of the total amount of airdrop, the total addresses that could have received an airdrop, claim the rewards until now.
Yeah, so this has been going like far better than we expected. We thought we'd get pretty decent uptake, but I'll just load up the latest to the minute stats. But so as of right now, we had 25 million tokens airdropped, and let's see, 15.5 million of them have already been claimed. So like around about 60%.
Yeah, I think it's even more. Yeah, 60%
I think you're right.
In 1 week, right?
Yes.
That's
62%.
crazy. That's crazy, especially since people have like 6 months time to actually claim those.
They do, yes. And pretty much everybody who's been claiming has been voting on our constitution as well. And we're now up to like 14 million votes, like in terms of tokens voted. And I think about 90,000 accounts voted on the constitution.
Before going a little deeper into the DAO thing, I was curious to know, can you please tell us more about the guy who forced you to cap the extension rewards to 8 years?
Yeah, so there is somebody who has registered a name, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, to the year 4200. Yeah, they've renewed it for like literally like 2000 years plus. And yeah, so when I did the original math, like without the cap, he basically just got like 50% of the airdrop. Well, no, not quite, but he got like 10% of the airdrop or something. It was ridiculous.
But can you remember if it was his name or it was just a random thing, as in, I don't know, like
I think it. I
cat.if
don't
or...
think it. Yeah, I don't think it's his personal name, but I can't remember for certain.
That's crazy. I think he
Yeah.
spent like more than 10,000 just to add all the extension to that name, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yeah, something like that. Yes.
Wow, he should be drunk, or he is either drunk or he has a very good PR.
We probably should have given him a few extra tokens just for the show of faith.
I think he should be public, because this is just like so crazy that if you don't go public with that, it's just like
Mhm.
a waste of the story.
Yeah.
So I was curious from a tech perspective, what's next for ENS? Because now everyone expects you guys to have like all kind of interesting stuff going, and I,
Hmm.
I think knowing the type of your business, I think it will be pretty difficult, if you ask me, in order to make people excited about the new things, because it's pretty technical. So
Yes.
let's see if I'm right or wrong, based on your assumptions.
All right. So I mean, there's going to be all kinds of like social and funding related stuff going through the DAO. But the big things we're working on from a technical point of view is a bunch of upgrades to the smart contracts. And so they're going to do a few things, including it'll be possible to register a name and set your primary record all in one transaction, and for not much more gas than just registering the name is currently.
Yep.
We're introducing something called the name wrapper, which will make all names at all levels of the hierarchy in ordinary NFTs instead of just .eth names. And it will also allow a new sort of permissions model where you could do something like you could register, say, wallet.eth, and then you can set it up in a way that you can issue people subdomains and they can be assured that you can't take them back. So that's been technically possible for a long time, but it's been missing like good contract tooling for it. But the idea is it'll make it possible to trustlessly issue subdomains and practical for people to do that really easily without sort of locking themselves into a single contract. And there are other neat models around that as well. The really big thing we're working on at the moment is L2 support. And so the way that works initially is anyone who owns a name will be able to delegate that name to a particular L2 or actually any off chain system they want. Like you can delegate it to your own server if you want, or you can delegate it to an L2, or you can delegate it to another chain. And when somebody resolves that name, basically your resolver returns, go check this API for the answer. You get the answer back and you verify it back with the original contract, and it checks that the result is accurate, which means that it can be just as secure as if you'd actually stored the names on chain, depending on how what your trust model is there, basically. And so this will it won't allow registering .eth names on an L2 yet, but what it will allow is if you've got a .eth name, you can update it costlessly by using an L2, or at very low cost, depending on what
Yeah.
system you pick. And you can also issue and update subdomains entirely on an L2.
But that
So
means...
that will make it.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
please go ahead.
So that will mean that organizations like wallet providers will be able to much more easily issue subdomains to all of their users without bearing the transaction cost for setting every user up.
But that implies that at a certain point in time, we will be able to register that ETH domains on layer 2, right?
I would, yeah, definitely at some point. The issue there is we kind of need a single source of truth, so we can't take the same approach of like choose your own L2. We will basically have to pick an L2 that is the L2 for registering .eth names. And that's something we're sort of avoiding doing for now because we don't want to kind of pick a winner this early, and for such a significant piece of infrastructure. When so many things are going to change between now and then. But the nice thing about this L2 solution for updating names is that it doesn't require us to do that, and you can use the one you want.
Yeah, yeah, makes total sense, especially since layer 2 solutions are pretty young yet. So probably making a commitment in terms of what layer 2 you will be using could be pretty risky, right?
Yes, very much so.
So going to the DAO discussion, I want to ask you about the DAO hack. How have you feel? How have you felt when it happened?
You're talking about the original
Yeah,
DAO, not the ENS
the
DAO. It's not
original.
something I should know here,
No, no,
you know.
no, the original DAO. Yeah,
Well, it's always been an interesting thing for me because my first day at the Ethereum Foundation was the day after the DAO hack.
exactly.
So I had a very eventful first week, and it was mostly spent like trying to help with like recovery efforts and stuff like that rather than anything else. Um, it is the sort of thing where, like in retrospect, and partly with just the benefit of hindsight and of knowing, um, how we should write good smart contract code now, but also, looking back and going, well, we should have looked more carefully at the time. It was quite a complicated contract, like more complex than it needed to be, and certainly more complex than the tooling could support at the time. And it was not as well tested or vetted as it should have been. And it also just had a particularly unfortunate issue that, although others had pointed it out, it was not commonly thought about when authoring smart contracts at the time. And part of our confidence here is that things like Open Zeppelin have got excellent engineering practices, and they build an excellent set of libraries that you can customize and use with much more minimal risk. And there are a lot more people who like know what they're doing now, and much more vetted systems for using DAOs and building DAOs.
Do you feel that that episode played a part in, let's say, the delay of building the tooling for the DAOs?
Uh, Maybe a bit. It probably set DAOs in general back a bit, and some of the tooling, like things like Snapshot and Tally, are very DAO dependent, and therefore, if there's no DAOs, there's no reason to build them. On the other hand, a lot of the tooling that's come a long way is just things like wallets and development tools and contract libraries and so on, and those things aren't specific enough to DAOs that they were sort of set back themselves.
I know that you have the Gitcoins model with delegates.
Mhm.
And can you please describe a little bit the role of a delegate
Yep.
in the
So,
context of ENS DAO?
mhm. So basically, while you still own the tokens, you can delegate their voting power to someone else, and that person, if they vote on something either on chain or on Snapshot, votes with the combined power of everyone who's delegated to them. And so that means that it's essentially representative democracy, in that you can pick someone to represent you, and the reason being that it's just not realistic to expect 100,000 people to individually care about the minutiae of running an entire organization, and particularly when they might have half a dozen or more tokens for different projects, there's just no realistic way that they can keep up with all of them. And it's the same reason that shareholders appoint boards and CEOs and so forth in publicly traded companies. The difference here is that with delegation, you can change your delegate at any time. You can simply, submit a transaction and allocate your votes elsewhere if your delegate, does something you disagree with, or is going to. And further, you can delegate to yourself if you want. You can just take the power back and vote on something on your own if you wish.
How many delegates? Is that a fixed amount of delegates, or it's
Uh,
something that I'm? Yeah, sorry, I didn't finish the question. So it was I was sure that you'll come with an answer without me finishing the question. So,
so there's no, like, basically a delegate is just anybody who has voting power.
mm-hmm.
And you can delegate to yourself. So you could have one token and delegate it to yourself, and congratulations, you're now a delegate. It's probably not cost effective for you to delegate to yourself if you only have, two tokens or something,
Yeah.
because you bear the costs of submitting votes on chain if you want to actually make that power felt. So you're better off finding someone else to represent you. But there is no limit. In reality, like if you're shopping around a proposal and you want to get support from people, you'll probably reach out to the top 10 or 20 or 100 or however many it takes delegates to get support, as well as talking publicly and so on. So there is a certain viability that comes with being one of the top end delegates, basically.
Yeah, I asked that because the feeling when the airdrop process started and the delegation process was part of the airdrop in a way or another, as in it was like it was
Hmm.
one of the stages. The people had the feeling that there is a fixed number of delegates, and those delegates will fight for the most votes from the other people. So the number is like it's not capped.
No. What we did is we opened up a week before the launch and we asked people to submit their applications as delegates, and then everyone who completed the application process got listed on that page, and could be voted for directly from the page. But there's also a button in the top right there where you can delegate your vote to anyone you like, including yourself.
Gotcha. So right now, I think are you still the first, or Brantley is the first?
Brantley's the first. I actually took myself off the page as a delegate for a while because I was a bit uncomfortable with being both the founder and having the largest number of delegated votes.
Exactly.
Um, I put myself back on just today actually because partly because I've dropped back in the rankings a bit, but also because uh, we've sort of we're aware that the way that the delegates are ranked on this page is really important. And so we've had a ranking function in there from the start that basically aims to sort of effectively move people who are too popular down the list. So the list isn't like the most popular at the top, it's actually kind of like moderately popular delegates at the top. And then if you get too popular and too many people vote for you, you get pushed down. And we've had that since the start, but we gave it a couple of tweaks today just to sort of improve the ranking a bit, and to try and give more airtime to people who are sort of in the middle leagues there. So I felt more confident adding myself back, knowing I wouldn't like immediately pop up to the top there.
Being a founder myself and hearing you speaking in a few podcasts while I was preparing this one, I was casting my votes, and I was like, I'm pretty sure Nick doesn't want me to delegate the votes to him, because I think as a founder, I think it doesn't make sense to try to centralize something that you want to decentralize.
Exactly.
So all my votes went to Eleftheris, as I told you, and I'm really happy to see him in top 10. I
Yep.
think he was, and I think he still is, because I think he's doing like a tremendous job in the last few years, and he's doing a very important job for the whole Ethereum ecosystem. And I was
Yep.
wondering, how do you feel seeing Coinbase there?
Hmm. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting because they're going to have an interesting and valuable perspective. But I'm perhaps a little uncomfortable the fact that that many people have delegated to them, giving them such a large voting power proportional to community members.
So, do you feel that you will see uh, in the next months, as ENS starts to become even more popular? Because I'm sure that will be the case. Do you think you'll see more well-known names that will start to receive shitloads of votes, or they will buy their votes in order to be part of the whole story? Because we've seen Alameda trying to be part of the BitDAO, and some other examples as well.
Yeah, it's tricky because the best time to be a delegate is before the launch, really, because all of these people are going to see your profile, and the process requires you to pick a delegate as part of the claim process. And one of the things we're going to have to figure out is how to make it easy and affordable for people to redelegate or to pick a delegate. Say you came along after the airdrop and you bought your tokens, to actually set a delegate. And you can do that now. You can go to the tally site, but you have to pay a transaction fee. And a lot of people are rightly going to ask, like, well, if this is for the good of the DAO, why do I have to pay a fee for it? What do I get out of it? Brutally.
Yep.
So one of the things we're going to want to discuss is like how to keep that sort of community level delegation going on. Because as you say, somebody could buy a lot of tokens and delegate to themselves and just buy some voting power. And in part, the value of the token ensures that's difficult. It's difficult to beat 500,000 votes delegated to Brantley, or 400,000 votes delegated to Chainlink God, just with brute force. So I think one of the solutions will be just to ensure that community delegation of small stakeholders continues to be attractive.
I was thinking yesterday, that's also an opportunity to educate these centralized companies about how we see the things, how we see things moving forward. If you want to
Mm-hmm.
participate within our ecosystem, these are the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure, like this concern that appeared on mostly on Twitter. I'm not sure it's I think it could be turned into a positive thing,
Mm-hmm.
because uh, being like on two different sides constantly, like we love decentralization, and on the other side we don't love your decentralization, we like more how we see things, we will not build the necessary bridges moving forward, especially since these centralized entities will probably be the onboarding vehicles for the new people coming to the crypto space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess the other thing I agree, and I guess the other thing I'd say is also, uh, Coinbase has that much power because that many people have delegated to them, and if they're seen to be throwing their weight around in a way that is sort of hostile to the ENS community, which I don't think is likely, then the people who have delegated to them can just as easily redelegate to somebody else who they believe better represents their interests.
While I was writing at the Stakeborg DAO white paper, I realized that while Ethereum is a technical layer, let's say, for DeFi and NFTs, I have a feeling that DAO could be the social layer that will define how we organize ourselves in the Web3 ecosystem. And
Hmm.
I was wondering, how fast should we innovate in the DAO space in order for that to happen? As in, what's the reasonable pace in which we should move in order to actually make that possible? Because my feeling is that the crypto industry is moving very fast, and DAO is and will be a very important concept, but which is very difficult to build a fast feedback loop around it.
Mm. Yeah, I think one solution for this is that newly formed DAOs will tend to be a little more experimental and adventurous with things. And then DAOs, once established, will tend to be a little more conservative. And that will work quite well because the new DAOs can try stuff out. And then if it works, the older DAOs can pick it up and adopt the innovation. And so that can create a sort of a virtuous cycle there where there's constantly new things being added to the front of the frontier, and then other things sort of pull in as they find it useful.
So do you see ENS DAO more like the new kid on the block that will allow himself to play with concepts, or more like the grandpa who will say like, "Well, look, don't break the glass while you are playing outside."
I think we're sort of in a bit of an awkward teenage phase at the moment, sort of partway between those. We're still very much in a sort of formation mode. People are going to be putting forth things like constitutional amendments to the constitution we wrote, and like basically things that become effectively bylaws, principles that we stand by, which can be replaced, but they sort of sit there as the law of the land until they are. And that the biggest changes probably come as you're launching and before you're launching, but then there's a room to define what you're going to be like when you get started. And then after that, as I say, become a little more sort of not too conservative, but cautious of moving too fast because you're aware of the responsibility of the things you're trying to do.
Yeah, makes total sense, and I think it also depends on the type of DAO that you are. Probably an investment focused DAO, VC focused DAO can play more, while something that's around, let's say, a pretty conservative business, if you think about it, like the domain names. If you think like from the traditional space, it's like very conservative. So I was curious
Yeah.
about that, and I forgot to ask you before going into the DAO topic. Have you had contacts with the real life domain registers, and how was that?
Yeah, we've worked with a bunch of them actually, because they've been interested in ENS. Like we worked with a company called Minds and Machines who owned the .lux TLD, and we launched, basically the first direct integration between ENS and a TLD with that. We worked a little bit with XYZ, we've worked a little bit with .art and so forth. And on the one hand, yeah, the sort of the industry as a whole is quite sort of stayed and established, and they have these protocols and systems that are all very well built out and specified and so on that everybody adheres to. And then ICANN itself is a massive force for conservatism in the industry. But on the other hand, our experience talking to these registrars and registries was that they're consistently trying to find interesting ways to innovate in the constraints of the environment they're in. So they were actually really interested in pushing this. And I think for a lot of them, it's because there are a lot of top level domains now, and there are a lot of registries, and they all want something that distinguishes them as interesting or worthy of using them.
So you have the feeling that disruption is like very close to that industry as well.
Yeah, I think as long as ICANN is the law of the land, they have some fairly firm ideas on what is and isn't a threat to the stability of the internet, basically. And some of that is sensible, and some of that is ruled by politics and vested interests. But I've seen a lot of willingness from the companies we've talked to, and I don't mean just the ones I mentioned, but just in general, to find ways to innovate that work around that and that are innovative without being directly disruptive.
How do you see this legislation discussion for the DAOs moving forward? As in, what should we want? Because this is something that I'm discussing with many people. We should have a good legislation. Okay, what is a good legislation? As in, what would you like? As in, we can do whatever we want. Is that legislation or is it jungle? So, what is good legislation for DAOs from your perspective?
I think that's going to take some real experimentation around. Like I think bylaws rather than legislation are the way to think about it. You have articles of association, you have bylaws which are passed by the board and the directors and stuff like that, and just borrowing knowledge from corporate governance and then changing it where it doesn't suit us is, I think, a pretty good principle and a pretty good starting point. And if there's one weakness of a lot of the Ethereum, the innovation going on in Ethereum and the crypto ecosystem, it is a tendency to ignore what's come before rather than learn from it. And that applies in some cases both technically and socially. So I hope we see people from the traditional legal community interested in participating who can actually offer us their expertise in like what works and what doesn't. And I don't mean that everything should be written in indecipherable legalese, but I mean that they can sort of talk about, well, here are the concerns that you need to address, and here are the issues we've seen with these sort of things in the past, and that you should bear in mind when you're writing it.
Yeah, makes total sense. And I think this, we have this tendency in this industry to consider that everything that we believe is important and everything that the other side believes is not that important, or not important for me at least. And if it's not important for me, it's not important for anyone. And I think moving forward, it will be like a challenge to find a middle ground between all these things. And do you think there are enough, let's say, moderate voices in order to actually succeed in pushing things forward from a legal perspective?
I think so. I think it will depend a little on how much we avail ourselves of the expertise that's available, and not making sure not to be dismissive in that sense. But I think that there are enough people out there who are a voice for learning from experience, that we have a very viable opportunity to do that.
I was discussing with Vitalik, and I think we both agreed that the DAO as a concept was used in the last few years, and more in the last few months, more like a concept that we will put on something else. As in, we have this product and we will add DAO to it in order to make it sexy, in order to avoid legal issues, in order to. So I was asking Vitalik if I think what is missing from the space. There are some, I think we need some DAOs that should be DAO think tanks, as in all that they should do is focus on what should we innovate on, what should be the most important discussions, because you are doing ENS, Kane is doing synthetics, and all the other guys that are doing DAOs, but and obviously you'll be spending 80% of your time probably working on ENS and 20% on finding new concepts around DAO and so on. Don't you think we should have a few DAO think tanks working as DAOs, obviously, but focusing just on that?
Yes, yeah, I would like to see like a meta DAO, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be a DAO. It just has to be a place that people who are embedded in DAO governance can come to discuss and find solutions to common problems we all have, and to fund and find resources for building tools that solve some of these problems.
Because I think whenever we get around the table and discuss about DAOs and so on, there are some incredible ideas flowing around, but after that we go to our whatever product we are building, and some ideas will remain just there. At a certain point in time, we discussed about that. Do you remember? Oh yeah. Well,
Yep.
probably something that could put all these things together and actually execute on them, and maybe be those new kids on the block that will experiment all these ideas, like a lab, something like a DAO lab. I think that that could work.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think one of the biggest problems distributed organizations in general have, and something like this in particular has, is lots of people who want to tell you their ideas, and not many people who actually want to execute them and have the time and the effort and the commitment to actually build the things. And it's a challenge, and it requires putting in structures in place to ensure that like compensation is available to actually hire professionals to build these things rather than just ideas.
Yeah, so I think we agree on this one. It's a pain point. So
Yeah.
I was curious, speaking about the big picture of the industry, moving a little bit from the DAO discussion. I think it's fair to assume that actually it's not fair to assume. I want to ask you, do you think if post EIP 1559, do you think Ethereum became a fat protocol?
Hmm. No, I don't think it fundamentally changed anything in that regard. I think that it's changed some of the narrative around Ethereum monetary policy and so on. But from my perspective, at least, 1559 was ultimately intended as a UX improvement, and I think it's done a pretty good job of that. And it was clearly targeted at that. The anything else is effectively a side effect.
So you don't see the danger of Ethereum becoming a fat protocol and extracting all the air from the room for the other projects.
I hope not. Like, I think that one of Ethereum's greatest strengths has been that it learns from its competitors, and it learns from other people in the space, and it's willing to innovate, where that's useful. And you can't learn from your competitors if you don't have any.
I think it's fair to assume that Ethereum will have more utility than Bitcoin moving forward because it's more
Mhm.
flexible. Uh, by having that in mind, do you think we will see a big flippening, as in big, not only in market cap but also Ethereum becoming a better store of value?
I mean, I've thought that both of those things were true so I've thought Ethereum is the better project for a long time. And I think I've thought for a long time that at some point the market will probably recognize that, but it seems to be a long time coming. Um, I I think it's probably inevitable in the long run, but God knows when. There's that saying that like the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that I cannot in any way predict any sort of market with any reliability. And anyone who tells you they can is almost certainly fooling themselves.
How do you see um how do you see this Bitcoin maximalism discussions on Twitter? How do you care about those? Do you think about those?
I occasionally find it entertaining to weigh in with a hot take on them, but I mostly try and ignore them. Some things are just too tempting to dunk on, but I generally try and keep my engagement on Twitter positive rather than negative. So I'm training myself to be more disciplined about this.
As Hoskinson was saying in Miami, that initially at there the community around Bitcoin was more friendly, was more focused on doing things, building things, thinking about where Bitcoin could go and so on. And things changed, and as time went by. And do you agree with that?
I do. I mean, when I came to Ethereum, with that, I joined cryptocurrency when I joined Ethereum. Like I toyed with Bitcoin a little bit before that, but no significant interest. So I can't really say I knew what Bitcoin was like, way back in the day, but it's definitely become more insular and hostile to outsiders since, in the past 5 years or so. And I think a large part of that has been that a large segment of that community actually embraces hostility as like a defense mechanism, which I think is extremely misguided, but that seems to be the sort of gestalt there.
We've seen recently Jack Dorsey, but also other companies that are trying to build on Bitcoin. What chances do they have to have those smart contracts on Bitcoin?
I think that they are needlessly handicapping themselves by insisting on building it on a platform that isn't designed for it. There are reasonably straightforward technical improvements Bitcoin could make that would make it vastly easier to build L2 type solutions on top of it. But there just isn't the motivation and the commitment to change there to actually implement these things. And so they inevitably get forced into these horrifyingly complex and insecure or requiring trust workarounds that just ensure that these things take vastly longer to deliver than anything built on another platform like Ethereum.
So you think that that's a time being wasted?
I think so. Like, you don't have to build on Ethereum, but for goodness sake, don't build on Bitcoin unless you're just making payments. If you want anything more complex than that, then pick a platform that was built for it.
I was curious, what do you think about all these so-called Ethereum killers? What chances do projects like Solana, Cardano, I don't know, Polkadot have
Mhm.
in order to actually have a chance with Ethereum?
Most of them I don't find very interesting in general because they all seem to take the same approach of, we'll basically take Ethereum's model, and then we'll just like increase the throughput massively and therefore increase the requirements for nodes and validators, to the point where it's impractical for anyone to run a node without major resources. And like Ethereum could do that if we decided we didn't care about the growth of the state size or the requirements for a validator, but we've made a conscious choice to be at a different point on the trade-off curve. So I don't think that on its own is particularly sort of noteworthy technical innovation. And some of them then decide that they'll make their lives extra difficult by not being EVM compatible. And I am a vocal critic of how stupid bits of the EVM are, but the simple fact is that there's far more tooling and developer mindshare around it than anything else. And so if you pick something else, you're fighting an uphill battle combined with another uphill battle. Um, but there are, interesting innovations on some of these, particularly around, some interesting, although I'm a little skeptical, proof of stake mechanisms around things like Avalanche, for instance. Some interesting ideas around different virtual machines, which, as I say, make your life particularly difficult, but we can still learn from them, and state models and so forth, that be a learning from. Um, I have to confess I'm less up to date with the some of the technical low level details of some of the competitors than I'd like, because there are definitely things to learn. But I feel like the really interesting innovations are in things like particularly roll ups and so forth. That enable you to still have a reasonably decentralized base layer, but then better throughput anyway, than they are at just like taking something and cranking the volume way up.
So to summarize actually, I won't summarize your answer. I will leave the our community to decide for themselves. Uh, Kane said in the previous episode that we had, there is no ideological difference between CZ and SBF, but we, the ones who believe in building decentralized projects, we have time on our side and we will win. What do you think about what Kane said?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting take, but I guess I don't fundamentally disagree.
Because like this discussion started from the same question, and Kane was saying that joke about all the validators from the Binance Smart Chain being CZ, and from there we moved to this centralized ideological perspective on things and the trade-offs between having being centralized and having small fees and so on. When do you think we will have decent fees on Ethereum?
I'm not sure that we ever will again. I think that stuff is going to move to roll-ups, and it's going to be much cheaper on roll-ups. But then the roll-ups are going to continue to put gas pressure on L1. So most people will not have to submit expensive L1 transactions, and things will get cheaper for people using Ethereum, but they'll be using it primarily through roll-ups rather than primarily through L1 transactions.
So probably Ethereum will just be a settlement layer.
To a large degree, yeah, and there will be certain important pieces of infrastructure that do their important updates on it, but and less a settlement layer than a dispute resolution mechanism for rollups and so forth, and a data availability layer.
And from a UX perspective, from the experience that users will have, do you think, like for example, MetaMask will be will integrate directly these scaling solutions, so you will not know that your transaction is not on L1, right?
I certainly hope so. Yeah, I mean, you might be aware, that this uses this network, but hopefully it's just a matter of going connect to X, rather than having to establish separate accounts and all that sort of stuff.
Speaking of
Uh,
yeah, please go ahead.
and certainly, I would expect it all to be integrated in a single wallet UX. If you had to use different wallets for different apps, that would just be a nightmare.
So we recently had Vitalik at the show, and we discussed the topic of Ethereum being more secure than Bitcoin. His argument was, and he discussed that at the podcast with Lex Friedman, at 5 million ETH staked, which was back in June, the Ethereum network has a better security than Bitcoin. Now that we have more than 8 million ETH from what I remember, do you agree with the idea of Ethereum being more secure than Bitcoin?
I mean, I think that's probably been the case, like even on Ethereum V1 for a while, because of transaction revenue and so fee revenue. Um, and yes, I mean it's very difficult to objectively compare security between proof of stake and proof of work, but you can sort of roughly approximate it by the value at risk. And I think that by that measure, and probably any other reasonable measure, that Ethereum is more secure. But I also think that in a way it's meaningless uh, because neither is practical to attack by any reasonable measure. They both have more security than they need. A better question might be, how much security per watt do you get, or how much security per ton of CO2 or whatnot? And in that case, there's absolutely no question.
So I remember that I had a discussion recently with someone who is more technical than I am. I finished history, so I'm not a tech guy, even if I understand technology. And he was telling me that the the Ethereum archive node size is like 9 terabytes, and it seems to be growing by about 1 terabyte every 3 months. Will ETH2 bring any improvements in that regard?
This is we owe a great whatever the opposite of a debt of thanks is to Etherscan on this, because although I love Etherscan, they have this one chart which is where this 9 terabyte figure comes from. And it's a Geth node that they started up at some point several years ago and have just let run without any pruning or as far as I can tell, any upgrades either. And it's not a fair representation of what it costs to run an archive node. I have an archive node running on my machine here, and it is, I've just loaded it up here. Where is it? So it's about, I think, 1.6 terabytes, and that's a complete archive node synced from Genesis using Aragon, which has an excellent space-efficient database. The other reality of that is that you don't need an archive node. Like, you're not actually sacrificing any security by running a full node because it verifies all the same things. It's just that it doesn't retain all of the past states, which for most purposes are irrelevant unless you're doing sort of historical lookups. ETH2 on its own won't really make a big difference there in its initial incarnation, but there are a couple of plans there. One is something called Regenesis, where the idea is you could basically create a new Genesis block that contains the entire state as of X, and then just reinitialize the network with that, which means nobody would need to care about transactions or blocks or anything before then. And the other option is stateless Ethereum, where basically every transaction has to package all of its inputs with it, and then you just store the hash of everything on chain and you submit proofs. I think stateless Ethereum is really very cool, but one of the issues it runs into is that the proof data can get really quite large.
So this, I think my technical friend will be very happy with your answer, because he was worried about the costs and the infura, and you know probably the discussion.
Yep, yeah, I do.
So my last question is a question that I'm asking everyone, and I think it will be interesting at a certain point to create a video with all the answers, because the question is, let's imagine that we are in 2009 and you are Satoshi, but you know everything that was learned afterwards. What would you do to change the course of history?
Wow. Well, not die would be a good start.
So you think the guy is dead?
I think Satoshi's almost certainly dead. I think there's two options. One is Satoshi's dead, and the other is he lost his keys and he's too embarrassed to admit it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would try and, like, I think early Satoshi, from what I've seen, had more of a commitment to innovation than modern Bitcoiners do. And I would try and do whatever I could to encode that expectation of continued change, conservatively perhaps, but with the intention of evolving to meet new use cases into Bitcoin. And perhaps it could have been the data availability and dispute resolution layer for things like rollups when they came along later, or at least it could have forked in the small improvements that would have been needed to make things like Lightning and rootstock and so on run efficiently, rather than with a custodial system, in some cases on top of Bitcoin. I mean, that would be the biggest thing I could think of as an improvement to Bitcoin. If you're talking about the whole world, then wow, that's a really wide scope.
No, the course of history for Bitcoin, obviously. And I was curious. I know I said it's my last question and it's really late there in New Zealand, but I have to ask, do you think that this narrative of being Bitcoin, the store of value, is not something that Satoshi envisioned?
I don't really know. I think, yeah, I mean, Bitcoin's initial vision was clearly around transactions, and that scalability things would concerns would be solved later, basically. because Satoshi was a smart person. He knew as well as anyone that there was a transaction throughput, but it must have seemed a limit, but it must have seemed a long way away at the time. And Bitcoin's narrative around what it's for has evolved basically as it's encountered sort of limitations and changes in the culture. So yeah, I guess it's reasonable to say that that wasn't his initial vision.
Gotcha. Nick, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you for everything that you do for this industry. And I'm really happy that this airdrop happened, because with this airdrop, many people found out about the work that you guys did in the last many years. Even if it looks like it happened like this, is not this is not how it works, even in crypto. So thank you very much for being with us, and good luck in with the roadmap that you have ahead.
Very much my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.